The dining room glowed with the golden shimmer of chandeliers, but the warmth in the air was only from the lights, not the people. I sat at the long oak table, my palms pressed into my lap, trying not to fidget as a dozen eyes flicked toward me, then back to their wine glasses. The clink of cutlery echoed like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. Lucas sat beside me, his hand resting reassuringly on mine, but even his gentle squeeze couldn't calm the storm that churned in my chest. This was my first formal dinner with his extended family since our wedding. I had expected awkwardness, maybe even polite questions or half-hearted small talk. But I hadn't expected silence so heavy it felt like an accusation. The Carter family was powerful. Old money, old traditions, old grudges too, perhaps. They prided themselves on being untouchable, rooted in generations of wealth. And me? I was a woman from a modest background, raised in a 2-bedroom home where laughter echoed louder than silverware. When the meal finally arrived, plates of perfectly seared lamb and delicately roasted vegetables, the tension should have eased. Food usually did that for me, but here it only sharpened the edges. Every forkful felt like a test, every glance another evaluation I was destined to fail. Lucas leaned closer, whispering, "Don't let them get to you. You're my wife. That's all that matters." I forced a small smile, grateful for him, but then the sound came. A deliberate clearing of the throat. The room stilled. At the head of the table, Gregory Carter, my father-in-law, rose to his feet with his glass of deep red wine raised high. His stature was commanding, his presence almost regal, but his eyes were like steel, cold and unyielding. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. A ripple of murmurs quieted instantly. Every family member turned to him, waiting, my heart hammered in my ears. He looked at Lucas first, then at me. His gaze lingered, heavy, sharp. "To family," he said slowly. "To those who carry the Carter name with pride, and to those who will always know their place." A few nervous chuckles escaped, but I sat frozen. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. Then his words landed, each one like a blade. "You'll never belong to this family." The room seemed to tilt. Silence followed, heavier than before, broken only by the faint clink of his glass meeting the rim of his plate. My fingers trembled around my fork, the lamb on my plate forgotten. Lucas's hand tightened on mine, his knuckles white. My cheeks burned, shame and anger colliding inside me, but no words came out. Across the table, Victoria looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. No one spoke up. Not a single voice rose to defend me. I realized then that this wasn't just a dinner, it was a trial, and the verdict had already been cast. The stem of my wine glass trembled slightly in my hand, though I tried to keep my expression composed. Across the table, Gregory Carter lowered his glass and sat with the satisfied posture of a man who believed he had spoken an unshakable truth. A murmur of uneasy laughter floated through the dining room before fading into a silence so sharp I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Lucas leaned closer, his jaw tight. "Dad," he muttered under his breath, his voice restrained but brimming with anger. That was completely out of line. Gregory gave a dismissive wave, as though brushing away dust. I simply said what needed to be said. Better to make things clear now than dance around them for years. I wanted to respond, to push back against his cruelty, but the weight of a dozen eyes pinned me in place. Victoria Carter shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her pearls catching the light as she lowered her gaze to her plate. She didn't defend me, didn't challenge her husband. She simply cut into her lamb, her knife sliding through the meat with mechanical precision, as though pretending nothing had happened. The rest of the family followed her lead. Forks moved again, glasses clinked, and shallow conversations resumed in careful tones. But the words hung in the air, echoing inside me louder than any clatter of cutlery. "You'll never belong to this family." I forced myself to lift my fork, though the food might as well have been ash. My throat was dry, my chest heavy with humiliation. All the warmth I had tried to bring to this table, the careful dress I had chosen, the polite smiles I had offered, the stories I had shared, had been crushed beneath Gregory's deliberate cruelty. Lucas kept his hand on mine, his thumb stroking gently across my knuckles. But his eyes were fixed on his father. There was fire there, restrained but undeniable. He had warned me before that Gregory could be harsh, that his father's approval was a prize rarely granted even to his own children. Still, I hadn't expected to be targeted so openly, so ruthlessly in front of everyone. I tried to swallow my shame, to breathe past the ache in my chest. If I spoke now, I feared my voice would crack, and that would only give Gregory more satisfaction. So I stayed silent, hiding my trembling hands beneath the tablecloth. Dessert arrived eventually, delicate custard set in glass dishes, but I could hardly taste mine. My mind churned with every glance, every whisper that seemed to skim just beneath the surface of conversation. I felt like an intruder in a house that was supposed to be home, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome at a table that had no seat meant for her. When the dinner ended, I rose slowly, my chair scraping softly against the polished floor. Gregory's eyes met mine once more, calm, certain, as if daring me to protest. I said nothing, but inside, a quiet resolve began to take root. The ride home was wrapped in silence, broken only by the hum of the tires against the pavement. Lucas kept his hands firm on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. Streetlights washed over us in brief flashes, illuminating his profile before plunging it back into shadow. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry, Amelia." His voice cracked on my name, heavy with regret. "You didn't deserve that." I stared out the window, watching the blur of city lights. My reflection in the glass looked pale, distant, like a woman I didn't quite recognize. He meant every word, Lucas. That wasn't just some offhand comment. He wanted to humiliate me. Lucas sighed, slamming his palm lightly against the steering wheel. He's always been controlling. My whole life, he's treated me and everyone else like chess pieces. But tonight, his voice faltered, anger and helplessness colliding. Tonight he crossed a line. I turned toward him, the question clawing at my chest. And what happens when he keeps crossing it? Do I just keep swallowing it down, pretending it doesn't matter? His eyes flicked toward me, pained. No, I won't let him do that to you. But the promise felt fragile, like glass already splintering at the edges. When we reached our apartment, I slipped off my heels and sank onto the couch, exhaustion pressing into me more than the wine or the evening itself. Lucas sat beside me, his hand brushing over mine again. "Amelia, you're my wife," he said firmly. "You belong with me." That's what matters, not what my father thinks. I nodded, but deep down, a gnawing ache remained. It wasn't just Gregory's words, it was the silence that followed them. Victoria had lowered her gaze. The cousins had kept talking about trivial things. No one had stood for me. The message was clear. I was an outsider, tolerated at best, and unwelcome at worst. That night, long after Lucas had drifted into restless sleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every word replayed in my mind, sharper each time, cutting deeper. "You'll never belong to this family." By dawn, a quiet determination had replaced my despair. If Gregory Carter believed I would cower, fade into the background, or vanish under his disapproval, he was wrong. I had built my life on resilience, on proving myself where others doubted me. This would be no different. As sunlight spilled across our bedroom, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't beg for their acceptance. I wouldn't shrink under their judgment. I would show them, not through words but through actions, that belonging isn't something handed down by people like Gregory Carter. The following weekend, Lucas suggested we visit his parents again. The thought made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to agree. Avoidance would only confirm Gregory's opinion of me, that I was weak, unworthy, unable to handle the weight of their family's scrutiny. When we pulled into the circular driveway of the Carter estate, the grand house loomed against the sky, its columns gleaming like ivory towers. Every inch of it radiated permanence and authority, the kind of wealth that had written itself into the city's history books. Victoria greeted us at the door, her smile polite but thin. "Amelia Lucas," she said, stepping aside. Her eyes flitted over me briefly, then shifted quickly away, as if lingering too long would be an act of disloyalty to her husband. Inside, Gregory was already in the study, seated in a high-backed leather chair with a tumbler of whiskey in hand. He looked up when we entered, his gaze sweeping over me like an appraisal. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just a silent reminder of where he believed I stood. "Father," Lucas began carefully, "we need to talk about what happened at dinner." Gregory arched a brow, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Do we?" I thought everything was perfectly clear. I opened my mouth, but Lucas's hand pressed gently against mine, signaling for patience. His voice was steady, but I heard the restraint in it. "You embarrassed my wife in front of the entire family." "That's not acceptable," Gregory leaned back, smirking faintly. "Embarrassed her?" I spoke the truth. "Amelia comes from a different world. She doesn't understand what it takes to uphold the Carter legacy." I felt my spine stiffen, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "With respect, Mr. Carter, legacy isn't about the size of a house or the weight of a name. It's about the values you live by. I may not have your wealth, but I know loyalty, perseverance, and respect." For a brief second, silence followed. Then Gregory's laugh rolled through the room, low and dismissive. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit won't earn you a seat at this table." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in the corner, her hands twisting together. Lucas's shoulders tensed beside me, but I felt a strange clarity settle over me. His father's words no longer cut as deeply. They revealed more about his insecurity than my worth. I straightened in my chair, meeting Gregory's stare without flinching. "Then I'll build my own table," I said quietly. Gregory's smile faltered, just slightly, enough for me to see that he hadn't expected resistance, not from me. When we left the estate that evening, Lucas squeezed my hand, pride softening his features. "That was the first time I've seen him speechless," he murmured. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a battle I hadn't chosen, but one I was determined to win. In the weeks that followed, the Carter family dinners became an unspoken battleground. Gregory no longer bothered with veiled comments. His disapproval hung in every pause, every icy glance. He spoke of business ventures and social circles as though I were invisible, as though my presence were an unfortunate oversight that he had yet to correct. Lucas defended me where he could, but Gregory's power wasn't just in his words, it was in the silence he commanded from others. Relatives who might have been kind kept their distance. Friends of the family, eager to stay in his good graces, avoided meaningful conversation with me. Every gathering was a reminder I wasn't one of them. But instead of retreating, I found strength in small acts of defiance. When Victoria mentioned a charity gala the family was hosting, Gregory dismissed me with a wave, insisting it wasn't my scene. I attended anyway, dressed in a gown I'd saved for months to afford, and spent the evening speaking with guests about causes I genuinely cared for. By the end of the night, I had made connections Gregory himself hadn't bothered to cultivate, people who valued authenticity over pedigree. Lucas noticed the shift. "You're not letting him break you," he said one evening as we walked home through the city. "He wants you to feel small, Amelia. But you're proving every day that you're not." His faith in me was a lifeline, but I also knew this war wasn't just about me. Gregory's disdain for me was tangled up in his expectations for Lucas. He wanted his son molded into his image, bound to traditions and legacies that felt more like chains than honor. And my presence disrupted that vision. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my suspicion. Gregory was in his study with Victoria, his voice carrying through the half-closed door. "She weakens him," he said flatly. "Lucas has potential, but not with her by his side. She'll pull him down to her level." Victoria's reply was softer, uncertain. "Gregory, she's his wife. He loves her." "That's precisely the problem," Gregory snapped. "Love clouds judgment. The Carter name demands clarity, not sentiment." I stepped back, my heart pounding. His words were cruel, but they sparked something fierce inside me. He saw me as a weakness, as a burden Lucas would regret. I would prove him wrong, not with desperate pleas for his approval, but with undeniable strength. That night, as Lucas and I shared dinner at our apartment, I told him everything. He listened quietly, his eyes stormy, his hand gripping mine with steady resolve. "Then we'll show him," he said at last. "Together. Not just that you belong, but that we're stronger than his name, his money, his expectations." And in that moment, I believed him. The chance to prove ourselves arrived sooner than I expected. Gregory hosted a dinner with several influential partners from his investment firm, an evening meant to showcase the Carter family's unity and prestige. Lucas was invited, of course, but Gregory made it clear through clipped words that my presence was unnecessary. "You'll only feel out of place, Amelia," he had said, his eyes narrowing as though daring me to disagree. I smiled politely and replied, "Then, I'll just have to surprise you." The night of the dinner, Lucas and I walked into the Carter estate together. The grand dining hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver. Gregory's lips tightened at the sight of me, but he said nothing, perhaps unwilling to cause a scene in front of his esteemed guests. As courses were served, I listened intently to the conversations swirling around the table. Stocks, markets, corporate strategies, cold, transactional topics. When one guest mentioned a philanthropic project in the city, I leaned in and asked thoughtful questions about their goals, their challenges, their vision for impact. My curiosity wasn't a performance. It was genuine. I'd spent years volunteering with local organizations, and my insights sparked a lively discussion that soon drew in half the table. By dessert, the once indifferent guests were seeking me out, asking for my perspective, laughing at my stories, nodding at my ideas. Gregory sat silently at the head, his jaw tight, his knuckles white against the stem of his glass. After the guests departed, the silence left behind was thicker than velvet. Gregory turned to Lucas first. "You should have told her not to interfere." Lucas bristled. "She didn't interfere. She elevated the evening." Gregory's gaze cut to me, sharp and cold. "You think charm and small talk make you part of this family?" "This isn't your world, Amelia." I met his stare, my voice calm but unwavering. "Maybe not. But tonight your world listened to me." For a moment, his expression flickered, something between anger and disbelief. He wasn't used to resistance, not from his son, and certainly not from me. Victoria, who had remained silent through most of the evening, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, tentative. "Gregory," the guest seemed impressed. "Perhaps that's worth considering." Her husband's glare silenced her instantly, but the damage was done. Someone had acknowledged what he refused to see. That night, as Lucas and I drove home, I felt both drained and exhilarated. "I don't think he'll ever accept me," I admitted. Lucas glanced at me, his expression warm with pride. "Maybe not. But you don't need his acceptance. You just proved you belong anywhere you decide to stand." His words wrapped around me like armor. Gregory Carter might control his family, his business, even his reputation, but he would never control me. The fallout from that dinner lingered like smoke after a fire. Gregory avoided me entirely for weeks, though his silence spoke louder than any insult. He stopped inviting Lucas to certain family meetings, subtle punishments meant to remind us of his disapproval. Yet whispers reached us through cousins and mutual acquaintances. The firm's partners had been impressed with my poise, even suggesting I had a talent for diplomacy that Gregory himself lacked. Lucas teased me about it, but I saw the pride in his eyes. "You're turning his world upside down," he said one evening as we sat on our balcony, the city lights flickering below. "I'm not trying to," I admitted. "I just refuse to be invisible." That refusal was tested at the Carter Foundation's annual charity gala. Gregory chaired the event every year, and it was his crown jewel, a chance to display both wealth and influence under the banner of philanthropy. When the invitations went out, ours never arrived. Lucas confronted his father about the oversight, only to be told coldly it wasn't an oversight. I refused to let humiliation sink its claws into me. Instead, I bought a ticket myself, using money I had saved from freelance projects Gregory knew nothing about. When we walked into the glittering ballroom, Gregory's face tightened as though he had swallowed something sour. The evening was a whirlwind of introductions, handshakes, and champagne toasts. Gregory tried to keep me sidelined, steering conversations away whenever I joined, but the momentum shifted naturally. Guests gravitated toward me, asking about my volunteer work, my ideas for expanding outreach, my genuine experiences rather than rehearsed speeches. By the time the auction began, I had spoken with half the donors in the room. When I raised my paddle to bid on a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, the applause that followed wasn't just for the cause, it was for the determination behind it. Afterward, Victoria approached me quietly, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "You were remarkable tonight," she whispered. It was the first time she had spoken words of kindness to me without hesitation, and it struck something deep inside. Perhaps she, too, had been crushed under Gregory's shadow for years, forced into silence. When the night ended, Gregory cornered us near the exit. His voice was low but venomous. "Do you enjoy embarrassing this family?" I met his glare with steady eyes. "I'm not embarrassing anyone. I'm showing them what your family could be if you allowed it." For the first time, he didn't have a retort, just a flicker of doubt in his otherwise unshakable demeanor. On the ride home, Lucas squeezed my hand. "He's losing control of the story," he said, "and he knows it." I stared out the window, a quiet determination burning in my chest. I hadn't won yet, but for the first time, I felt the balance shift in my favor. The weeks after the gala brought subtle but undeniable changes. Where once I was ignored, now I was acknowledged. Even if grudgingly, Gregory still withheld affection. But business associates began including me in conversations, asking for my thoughts directly rather than funneling everything through him. At family dinners, cousins who had previously stayed quiet now engaged me openly, curious about my ideas and experiences. Victoria, too, softened. She began inviting me to tea in the afternoons, casual at first, then warmer. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," she confessed one day, her voice tinged with sadness. "I had dreams, Amelia, big ones. But Gregory, he convinced me those dreams had no place here." Her words lingered with me long after I left. It became clear that my struggle wasn't only my own, it was hers too, and perhaps that of anyone who had tried to breathe freely within Gregory's iron expectations. Lucas, ever my anchor, encouraged me. "Every time you stand up to him, you're showing the rest of the family that his way isn't the only way." But Gregory was not a man to surrender quietly. At the next family dinner, he unveiled a new challenge. As the servants cleared the plates, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto mine. "If you're so determined to prove yourself, Amelia," he said smoothly, "perhaps you'd like to organize the upcoming Carter Foundation benefit dinner. It's the most important event of the year. Surely someone of your spirit can manage it." His words were honeyed with mockery. He expected me to falter, to stumble under the weight of responsibility, proving his point that I didn't belong. I held his gaze. I'd be honored. Lucas stiffened beside me, sensing the trap, but I gave his hand a reassuring squeeze under the table. This was the moment Gregory had been waiting for, a chance to see me fail publicly. But he didn't understand. I thrived under pressure. My entire life had been about rising where others expected me to fall. The following weeks were grueling. I threw myself into planning, coordinating with vendors, designing the menu, curating entertainment. Victoria surprised me by offering her help, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like pride. Together, we transformed the sterile event into something vibrant, meaningful, and inclusive. On the night of the benefit, the ballroom glittered with candlelight and laughter. Guests marveled at the warmth of the evening, praising the thoughtful details and heartfelt speeches. Donations poured in, surpassing any previous record for the foundation. When the final tally was announced, applause thundered through the room. I caught Gregory's expression across the table, tight-lipped, unreadable, but undeniably shaken. He hadn't expected me to succeed, certainly not to outshine him in his own domain. That night, as Lucas and I walked out of the venue hand in hand, he whispered, "You didn't just prove yourself tonight. You rewrote the entire story." And I knew he was right. Success has a way of revealing truths people would rather keep hidden. After the benefit dinner, praise for the Carter Foundation poured in, but so did questions. Why hadn't Gregory ever allowed this kind of event before? Why had it taken an outsider to breathe life into a cause that should have mattered all along? I noticed the shift in whispers at social gatherings. Where once I had been dismissed, now, people leaned toward me, curious, respectful. Gregory hated it. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened whenever someone complimented me within earshot, in the sharp way he changed the subject when my name was mentioned. But the one who changed most was Victoria. She began to walk taller, her laughter freer. She joined me in my volunteer projects, dusting off her own long-neglected passions. Over tea one afternoon, she confided, "You've reminded me that I'm more than his shadow, Amelia." I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Her words touched me deeply. Perhaps my greatest victory wasn't against Gregory, but in helping her reclaim her own light. Still, I knew Gregory was planning his next move. Men like him didn't lose gracefully. His chance came when Lucas was invited to join the firm's board of directors. It was an honor, one Gregory had long prepared him for, but it came with conditions. At a private meeting in his study, Gregory laid them out plainly. "You'll take the seat," he told Lucas, "but your wife will keep her distance. No more meddling in family affairs. No more stepping into roles that aren't hers. If she insists on inserting herself, your position here will be jeopardized." Lucas's response was immediate, his voice firm. "If you think I'll sacrifice my wife for a seat at your table, you don't know me at all." Gregory's eyes narrowed. "You'd throw away everything I've built for her?" Lucas stood taller, his hand finding mine. "I'd build something better with her." The silence that followed was electric, filled with Gregory's disbelief and barely contained fury. For the first time, Lucas had openly chosen me over his father's legacy. That night, lying in bed beside him, I felt both the weight of what we had risked and the freedom in knowing we had stood our ground. "He'll try to make us pay for this," I whispered. "Let him try," Lucas murmured, kissing my forehead. "We'll face it together." And as I drifted into sleep, I realized Gregory's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating me. It had been underestimating us. The storm broke sooner than expected. Word of Lucas turning down his father's conditions spread quickly through the firm, and soon whispers circulated that Gregory's iron grip wasn't as unshakable as it once seemed. Some respected him less for his stubbornness. Others quietly admired Lucas for standing firm. For the first time, the Carter name wasn't synonymous with unquestioned control. It was associated with choice, with courage. Gregory responded with silence, the kind that spoke volumes. He excluded us from dinners, ignored calls, and made it clear we were not welcome in his carefully constructed world. But isolation didn't break us. It freed us. Lucas and I began hosting gatherings of our own, smaller but warmer, filled with friends who valued sincerity over status. The contrast was striking, where Gregory's table was heavy with rules. Ours overflowed with laughter and belonging. Victoria attended more often than not, at first under the guise of helping with preparations, then simply because she enjoyed being there. I saw her bloom in those evenings, her smile no longer hesitant but radiant, her voice carrying through the room without fear. Sometimes I caught her looking at me with quiet gratitude, as though I had unlocked a door she thought had been sealed forever. The final confrontation came months later at another family dinner. We hadn't been invited, but Victoria insisted we attend, her own quiet rebellion. The moment we walked in, Gregory's eyes darkened. Conversation faltered as he rose slowly, glass in hand, echoing the moment where it had all begun. "I suppose it's fitting you're here," he said, his voice hard as granite, "since you've made it your mission to undermine this family at every turn." I felt Lucas tense beside me, but I stepped forward, my voice steady. "I never tried to undermine your family, Gregory. I tried to be part of it. You shut the door on me, and when you did, I built a life that didn't need your permission." The room was silent. His glass shook slightly in his hand, a tiny crack in the fortress of his authority. "You'll never carry this name with the pride it deserves," he spat. "No," I agreed softly. "I'll carry it with honesty instead." "And maybe that's what it's been missing for once." Gregory had no reply. His gaze flickered to Victoria, who stood at my side, chin lifted proudly. Then to Lucas, whose unwavering stance mirrored my own. The balance had shifted entirely. He was no longer the man at the head of the table. He was simply a man unwilling to change. That night, as Lucas and I walked away from the Carter estate, the air felt lighter than it ever had. I squeezed his hand, a smile breaking across my face. "Do you realize what just happened?" I whispered. Lucas looked down at me, his eyes shining. "Yes," he said simply. "You belong exactly where you choose to." And for the first time since Gregory Carter raised that glass, I felt it was true.